Fallow Creek lay simmering under the relentless sun, a once thriving town now reduced to a barren stretch of parched earth and despair. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of dried grass, punctuated only by the low murmur of wind that seemed to whisper tales of the past. Amidst the desolation, Dr. Margaret Lane stood resolute, her presence a flicker of hope in an increasingly darkened world. With her sharp mind honed from East Coast education and battlefield medicine, she had become more than just a healer, she was a lifeline. Each morning began with a ritual of sorts. Before dawn broke, Margaret would gather supplies from her cluttered cabin that served as both home and clinic. The shelves were lined with jars of herbs, bandages, and tinctures crafted from nature's bounty, all meticulously organized. She had learned to make do with what little she had, developing remedies for fevers and infections that many locals dismissed as mere old wives' tales. Yet no act of kindness came without its burden. As she roamed the dusty streets, delivering babies or setting broken bones, she was often met with furtive glances and whispered judgments, especially from Elias, the town preacher. His sermons thrummed with fervor as he proclaimed anything beyond his understanding to be demonic afflictions, a stance that left a mark on Margaret's heart. In this isolated outpost of humanity, her spirit wavered under the weight of responsibility. Neighbors who once sought her help began drawing away, their faces twisted in confusion between faith and fear. The townspeople's desperation gnawed at the edges of sanity. They grasped at straws rather than listen to reason. If only they could see that she was not their adversary but their ally in these troubling times. But the breaking point loomed closer than any drought-induced famine. The arrival of tragedy, one innocent life lost to an illness that eluded even her skilled hands, would shift whispers into shouts, turning gratitude into suspicion and casting shadows over her dedication to Fallow Creek. Dr. Margaret Lane's journey to Fallow Creek began far from its parched landscape, in the bustling environment of an esteemed East Coast medical school. There, she navigated the rigors of medical training with a determination that set her apart from her peers. While most of her classmates succumbed to the comforts of privilege, Margaret thrived under pressure, driven by a profound sense of purpose and the desire to make a tangible difference in people's lives. Her professors recognized her potential, often remarking on her quick instincts and deep empathy. However, it was her time on the battlefield during the Great War that truly forged her into a remarkable healer. Amidst the chaos and carnage, Margaret witnessed suffering on an unimaginable scale. She was thrust into harrowing situations where every second mattered and where lives hung by a thread. With limited resources and constant danger, she learned to improvise, using whatever was at hand to mend wounds and treat infections. Each life saved deepened her resolve, but the trauma she endured left indelible scars on her soul. Returning home after years of harrowing experiences, Margaret sought solace in the stability of smaller communities, believing she could provide healing where it was most needed. Fallow Creek, with its skeletal trees and cracked earth, seemed like a refuge, a place where her skills could be both tested and treasured. Yet rather than gratitude, she found herself battling ignorance and superstition. As she gained the trust of some townspeople through countless acts of compassion, delivering healthy babies and providing comfort to the ailing, others remained skeptical. Driven by fear or influenced by Elias, the preacher who filled their hearts with doubt, they saw her as an outsider with strange methods. Despite this resentment, Margaret persisted, illuminating the darkness surrounding Fallow Creek with her unwavering commitment to healing. Yet now, as tragedy loomed ever closer, the very qualities that defined her resilience would soon become both her salvation and her curse. Each day in Fallow Creek unfolded like a relentless cycle of hardship and service for Dr. Margaret Lane. As the sun rose over the skeletal trees, she began her morning by replenishing her makeshift clinic, where jars of herbal remedies lined the shelves alongside bandages crafted from old linens. The town offered little in terms of modern medicine, but Margaret's resourcefulness turned nature's bounty into her arsenal against illness. Her schedule was a whirlwind of activity. She delivered babies in cramped wooden shacks, often aided only by the trembling hands of anxious fathers and whispered prayers from superstitious neighbors. Each birth brought a mix of hope and dread, for she knew that life could be as fragile as the dried leaves scattered across the parched ground. Margaret treated everything from broken bones to persistent fevers, each ailment handled with care and attention. However, no matter how many lives she improved or saved, her methods were frequently questioned. Scornful glances followed her through town as people spoke in hushed tones about the female doctor who employed strange techniques from faraway places. To many, her education felt foreign and suspect. Those steeped in tradition found it hard to trust a woman whose practices deviated from their understanding. Elias, the preacher, saw an opportunity to capitalize on fear when illness struck. He painted her as an outsider wielding dark arts instead of healing hands, stirring whispers into accusations woven with superstition. Each day, Margaret faced not just physical challenges but an emotional landscape riddled with suspicion, a tightening noose around her reputation. The weight of disappointment pressed heavily on her shoulders when neighbors who once sought her aid began retreating behind closed doors. Despite this turmoil, Margaret remained unwavering in her commitment to heal those who needed her most. Even when plagued with doubt, she recalled the faces of patients whose lives she had touched, a baby taking its first breath or a fevered child returning to laughter. But as the specter of tragedy loomed ever closer following a devastating loss in the community, Margaret braced herself for what might come next, knowing that resilience alone may not protect her from the mounting waves of fear and intolerance crashing against her fragile sanctuary in Fallow Creek. The shadow of despair hung heavily over Fallow Creek, growing darker with the sudden passing of a young girl named Clara. Just days before, she had been a bright spark of joy in the community, her laughter ringing through the dusty streets. Margaret had been treating her for a persistent fever, employing every remedy she knew from herbal tinctures to cooling compresses. Yet, despite her valiant efforts, the illness that ravaged Clara's small body proved relentless. On that fateful morning, Margaret received the news with a heart that felt as if it had been cleaved in two. She rushed to the girl's home, her mind racing with frantic thoughts of what more she could have done. Kneeling beside Clara's lifeless form, she pressed a trembling hand to the child's forehead, now cold and still. The grief was profound, a heavy weight that threatened to suffocate her. Margaret fought back tears, knowing that this loss would ripple through the town like a stone cast into a still pond. As word spread of Clara's death, the atmosphere in Fallow Creek shifted ominously. What had once been whispers of concern transformed into shouts of accusation fueled by fear and misunderstanding. The townsfolk, desperate to make sense of the tragedy, latched onto their superstitions. Elias seized the moment, his voice rising in fervor as he preached about demonic afflictions and unnatural forces at play. He painted Margaret as the harbinger of misfortune, the outsider whose foreign methods had brought calamity upon them. Margaret found herself at the center of an emotional storm. Grief turned to fear among the townspeople, and fear quickly mutated into rage. Accusations flew like arrows, piercing through her spirit. She was no longer their healer but their scapegoat. Faces that once held gratitude now turned away in disdain, and Margaret could feel the tightening grip of hostility closing around her. In those dark hours following Clara's death, Margaret realized that her commitment to healing was now entangled in a web of suspicion. The impending conflict was palpable, a storm brewing on the horizon that threatened to consume her very existence in Fallow Creek. Desperation clawed at her heart as she grappled with the realization that she might soon be fighting not just for her reputation, but for her life itself. As the dust settled on Clara's grave, the air in Fallow Creek grew thick with anxiety, transforming sorrow into a palpable fear that wrapped tightly around the townsfolk. Conversations once marked by familiarity and warmth turned hushed and wary, as if the very act of speaking could evoke the ire of some unseen force. Margaret felt this shift acutely. It coursed through her like a chill on a summer's day, prickling her skin with dread. Elias seized upon the growing unease, his sermons taking on an urgency that stirred the hearts of his congregation. He painted vivid pictures of dark forces at work among them, suggesting that Clara's death was but a prelude to greater calamity. "Beware," he warned, "the witch who walks amongst us." Those words hung heavily in the air, igniting whispers that flitted like shadows through the town. Margaret's presence, once a source of hope, had turned into a beacon for suspicion. Neighbors exchanged furtive glances whenever she passed by, their faces contorting with fear as they questioned her methods that were foreign to their understanding and perceived as dangerous. She could feel their gazes weighing upon her like chains, each whisper echoing in her mind, reminding her that she was now an outsider in the only home she had sought to heal. With every passing day, tension reached a boiling point. The townsfolk began gathering at Elia's church not merely to pray for healing, but to voice their fears and grievances against Margaret. They spoke of strange occurrences, livestock falling ill after being treated by her or children developing maladies that seemed to appear out of thin air. In their desperation for answers, they latched onto superstition like a lifeline. Margaret found herself navigating a treacherous path where every act of kindness was scrutinized and misinterpreted. Her heart ached not only for Clara, but for the community she had tried so hard to serve. The fear brewing among them was as tangible as the parched earth beneath their feet, a dangerous cocktail of grief and misunderstanding that threatened to erupt violently. In this suffocating atmosphere, Margaret understood that she stood on the brink of something far more perilous than mere mistrust. As anxiety transformed into hostility, it became clear she must prepare herself for what lay ahead, a confrontation not just with illness but with a town teetering dangerously close to chaos, driven by fear in search of a scapegoat. The tension that had simmered in Fallow Creek reached a violent boiling point one fateful evening when the townspeople, fueled by fear and manipulated by Elias' words, gathered outside the rickety walls of Margaret's clinic. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, thickening like a storm cloud obscuring the sun. The preacher stood at the forefront, whip in hand, his fiery rhetoric drawing out accusations that had once been whispered in shadowed corners. "Let justice be served," bellowed, his voice carrying through the chill as a crowd formed, hearts pounding with rage and uncertainty. Dread twisted in Margaret's gut as she peered through the window of her clinic, realizing she could no longer hide from their fervor and paranoia. The familiar faces of patients who once entrusted her with their lives had transformed into a mob demanding retribution for all they could not understand. They trekked towards her home with burning torches held high like phantoms ready to enact ancient laws. "Witch! Murderer!" their cries rang out, piercing her heart like arrows tipped with venomous malice. Panic coursed through her veins as she hurried to gather whatever meager possessions she planned to take into hiding. But before she could escape the confines of her own sanctuary, heavy footsteps echoed across the creaking floorboards. Suddenly, Elias burst through the door, followed closely by enraged townsfolk who seized Margaret with rough hands, dragging her away from familiar surroundings. "You will answer for your crimes," he shouted, unleashing accusations laced with unfounded beliefs. As they bound her wrists with coarse rope and pulled her into the street, she felt her spirit fracture beneath the weight of betrayal. Underneath a canopy of angry faces and somber shadows, Margaret fought against despair as each indignity unfolded around her. Fear gripped her heart. Was this community now beyond any hope of healing? They marched her toward an improvised gallows hastily erected near the church, the once promising pulpit now transformed into a stage for unjust punishment. Amidst feeling utterly alone, one thought flickered inside her mind. If only they were willing to listen to reason instead of letting fury dictate their actions. With deafening clamor and bloodlust radiating from every side, little remained of the town she had dedicated herself to saving. As they prepared to take justice into their own hands under false pretenses, and pulled tighter on ropes that both bound and suffocated, an unexpected figure appeared from the darkness. A stranger with uncertain motives but unmistakable resolve. The night was far from over. Chaos brewed in Fallow Creek while Margaret found herself faced not just with confrontational hatred, but also an unexpected lifeline standing ready to intervene. The makeshift gallows loomed ominously under the night sky, a stark reminder of the precariousness of life in Fallow Creek. Doctor. Margaret Lane was dragged forth by rough hands that treated her more like a wild animal than a healer, her wrists bound tightly in coarse rope that dug painfully into her skin. The jeers and shouts of the townspeople surrounded her like an angry tide, rising with each step they took toward the ominous structure. With every heartbeat, despair twisted deeper in her chest, and she felt the weight of betrayal from those she had once cared for pressing down on her like lead. The town preacher stood at the forefront of the crowd, eyes glinting with fervor as he proclaimed her guilt with a conviction that made Margaret's skin crawl. The cries of "witch" echoed in her ears, drowning out any rational thought and filling her with a profound sense of helplessness. Pushed forward beneath the unforgiving gaze of the mob, Margaret glanced up at the gallows, an unforgiving tableau against the dimming light. Her heart raced as memories flooded back, the laughter of children she had helped deliver, the gratitude of mothers whose babies thrived under her care, now all replaced by faces twisted in rage and fear. It felt surreal. She was trapped in an echo chamber of their ignorance and prejudice. As they hoisted her onto the platform, she fought against panic surging within. "Please," she gasped, desperation spilling over into her voice. "You don't understand, I tried to save Clara." But her words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the pulse of anger resonating through the crowd. Then came a sharp blow to her side. Someone had struck her, an act fueled by fear rather than malice but devastating all the same. Pain radiated through her body as she stumbled to regain her footing, feeling utterly isolated amidst this brutal display of retribution. Chained and battered, Margaret found herself staring into the eyes of those who had once sought healing from her. Just as the noose was prepared to encircle her neck, a cruel twist on all she had devoted herself to, the figure from earlier stepped forward out of darkness. The stranger's presence ignited a flicker of hope inside Margaret's desperate heart. She didn't know what kind of salvation he might offer or if it was even possible, yet this moment seemed poised on a knife's edge. There was still time for something to change. With breath held tight in anticipation, Margaret braced for whatever would come next, her future uncertain but undeniably entwined with both danger and potential redemption as chaos unfolded around them. Just as the noose hovered above Margaret's head, the crowd's fervent chanting suddenly stilled, replaced by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Emerging from the shadows was the stranger, tall and rugged, with an air of defiance that cut through the tension like a knife. His weathered face bore the marks of hardship, and his piercing gaze seemed to survey both the turmoil of the mob and Margaret's perilous situation with keen awareness. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice resonating with authority that immediately quelled the shouting crowd. In his hands, he clutched a rifle that gleamed ominously under the dim light, a silent promise of protection or perhaps retribution. The townspeople stepped back, confusion rippling through them like a wave as they hesitated to confront this unexpected force. Margaret felt a spark of recognition in his eyes, as though he carried burdens similar to her own, wounds etched deep from battles fought both internally and externally. "I won't let you harm her," he asserted, locking eyes with Elia's, whose expression shifted from wrathful to apprehensive. This stranger was not simply an ally but a harbinger of something darker that lurked in Fallow Creek's underbelly, a kindred spirit forged by pain and survival. As silence enveloped the scene, the stranger turned to Margaret for a fleeting moment. "We can escape this," he whispered fiercely, urgency underlining his words. In that instant, hope flickered within her heart, battling against despair's suffocating grip. She could see it in his expression. He had faced down his own demons and emerged scarred but unbroken. Elias' authority wavered as he attempted to rally the crowd once more, but doubt had seeped into their ranks. The stranger stepped closer to Margaret, ready to act as both shield and sword against the rising tide of chaos. With purpose igniting her spirit anew, she found herself desperate not just for survival but for vindication, a chance to reclaim her identity as a healer rather than a scapegoat. In this critical moment, the gallows faded into the background. What once seemed an inevitable end now felt like an opening. Together with this enigmatic stranger, Margaret prepared for a confrontation, not just for her life but for her very essence as someone who cared deeply amid perpetual darkness. As adrenaline surged through her veins, she knew they would either find a way out together or face whatever fate awaited them head-on, her life forever altered by this unexpected alliance born out of shared struggle. Under the cover of night, Margaret and the mysterious stranger fled into the wilderness, the echoes of Fallow Creek's tumultuous judgment fading behind them. Heart pounding in her ears, Margaret stumbled through the underbrush, the cool air filling her lungs but doing little to calm the storm inside her. Adrenaline surged through her veins, painting a stark contrast to the dread that had settled in her soul, a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty now entwined with an unexpected sense of liberation. The stranger, whose name she still didn't know, moved ahead with purpose, his presence both reassuring and intimidating. He navigated the trees with an ease that suggested familiarity with wild terrains, while Margaret struggled to keep up, her body still weak from the physical ordeal she had endured just hours before. Despite their shared plight, doubts crept into her mind. What kind of man was he? Was he truly there to help her or simply another potential threat? As they pressed deeper into the woods, silence enveloped them save for the rustling leaves and distant animal calls. They eventually found a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the branches. Here they paused for a moment to catch their breath. Margaret's legs ached and her heart still raced at the memory of the mob's fury. "We need to stay low," he said finally, glancing around as if assessing their surroundings for any pursuit. They will be searching for you." His voice was gruff but steady, instilling in her a strange sense of trust. "I'm not some kind of monster," he added, sensing her wariness, "just someone who knows what it's like to be hunted." In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, Margaret caught a glimpse of his past etched in the lines of his face, a mirror of her own struggles etched in scars both visible and hidden. The darkness they both bore had forged an unspoken bond between them. As they settled in to rest, Margaret wrestled with conflicting emotions, relief that she had escaped Fallow Creek, but pain for the community she once sought to heal. Memories of Clara gnawed at her heart as guilt settled in. Could she truly abandon them when they needed help? But at that moment, survival took precedence. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, almost as much to herself as to him. The realization that she now had to rely on this stranger sent tremors through her core. Together, they were navigating a landscape fraught with danger and uncertainty. Her instinct to heal clashed with her need to survive. With dawn approaching and weary eyes fixed toward their uncertain future, Margaret felt a flicker of resolve deep within her. She would reclaim her purpose, perhaps not as a healer in Fallow Creek, but as someone determined to forge a new path, no matter how perilous it may be. Together they would face whatever awaited them in this wild expanse, a partnership born from shared scars and driven by survival instinct against a world intent on tearing them apart. As the days passed in their hidden refuge, the weight of Margaret's moral dilemma pressed heavily on her mind. The wilderness offered a temporary escape, but it could not shield her from the chaotic thoughts swirling within. She felt an inner conflict brewing like a storm, her instinct to heal battling fiercely against the desire for vengeance that simmered beneath her skin. The stranger, whose name she now knew to be Jonah, remained a silent presence, often lost in his own reflections. They shared a bond formed from trauma, yet their paths diverged in one crucial aspect. He seemed to embrace the darker impulses born from betrayal, while she struggled to reconcile her commitment to healing with the rage that threatened to consume her. "Why do you hold on to them?" Jonah asked one evening as they sat beside a small fire, its flickering light casting shadows on their weary faces. "Those who turned against you, they don't deserve your compassion." Margaret stared into the flames, watching them dance as memories flooded back, the faces of mothers who had once looked at her with gratitude, children saved from illness under her care. "They were my patients," she replied softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't just forget that they needed me." "But they betrayed you," he pressed, his tone hardening. "You have every reason to want retribution for what they did." "I know," she admitted, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. The fear and hatred directed toward her felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. Yet in seeking vengeance, would she lose herself completely? Would she become what they accused her of being, a monster lurking in the darkness? As night deepened around them and stars twinkled overhead like distant memories of better days, Margaret's thoughts spiraled into turmoil. She envisioned returning to Fallow Creek, not as a healer but as someone consumed by anger, wielding pain instead of compassion. The thought made her stomach churn. She couldn't bear the idea of becoming like Elias or any of the townsfolk who had turned against her. "I don't want my life to be defined by this hatred," she finally said, determination creeping into her voice. "I want to heal. I want to help those who truly need it." Jonah regarded her thoughtfully, acknowledging the struggle etched across her face. "Then we need to find another way. If we're going back to Fallow Creek, and I can help you do that, you need strength beyond vengeance." Their eyes locked in understanding. Together they could either forge a path of destruction or attempt to reclaim what had been lost through compassion and bravery. As dawn approached and illuminated the horizon with hints of gold and pink, Margaret began to feel a flicker of hope ignite within. A resolve to navigate this treacherous journey not just for survival, but with purpose still intact, committed to healing rather than hurting despite the temptations of revenge echoing all around them. As dawn broke over the wilderness, Margaret stood on the edge of a clearing, the soft morning light contrasting sharply with the darkness that had enveloped her heart. The choices looming before her weighed heavily. She could feel their gravity pulling at her conscience like a current dragging a ship into deep waters. She felt torn between two identities, the healer committed to saving lives and the woman scorned, desperate for retribution against those who had turned against her. Jonah watched her struggle with an awareness that transcended words. He understood the damage inflicted by betrayal and how it could twist one's purpose into something dark and unrecognizable. "What will you choose when we go back?" he asked gently, breaking the silence that wrapped around them. Margaret's heart raced as she considered his question. She pictured herself returning to Fallow Creek, not to continue her role as a healer but consumed by the need for vengeance, driven to confront those who had sought to destroy her. The very notion made bile rise in her throat. She didn't want to become what they believed her to be but feared she was already teetering on that precipice. "I can't let this hatred shape me," she said after a long pause, crossing her arms over herself as though shielding her spirit from further harm. "But what am I supposed to do? They still see me as a monster." "The world can be unforgiving," Jonah replied, his expression grave yet understanding. "But becoming one of them just sacrifices everything you stand for." Tension hung silently in the air, thickening as Margaret weighed his words against the rage festering within her, a fire waiting to erupt. Each day that passed in hiding chipped away at her empathy, replaced by whispers of revenge. But even now, flickers of compassion clung stubbornly to life in her heart, the memories of Clara's smiling face, faces who had trusted and relied on her care. "I want to believe there's still hope for me," she finally said, conviction threading through her voice once more. "Instead of leaving this world behind filled with bitterness, I could return and show them." Her voice trailed off as doubt flickered across Jonah's features. "Show them what?" he asked softly. "That I'm not broken," she whispered fiercely. "That healing isn't just about medicine, it's about empathy." Silence settled over them again, but felt different this time, charged with resolve rather than despair. In that moment, Margaret made a choice embedded deep in both the healer and woman forged by adversity. She would confront Fallow Creek not with fury, but with redefined purpose, compassion propelled by understanding of human frailty rather than indulging in vindictive impulses. This choice would shape not only their return, but also restore whatever semblance of humanity still existed within both herself and a town steeped in fear and misunderstanding. As they prepared for what lay ahead, Margaret felt renewed purpose ignite within, a reaffirmation rooted deeply in whose truth remained steadfast despite all darkness around them. Healing was not merely an act, it remained an indomitable spirit that refused to be extinguished even amid chaos. With a newfound resolve, Margaret and Jonah made their way back to Fallow Creek, the familiar landscape now tinged with the weight of her past. As they approached the town, the memories flooded back, the laughter of children, the grateful faces of mothers, and the warmth of community that had swiftly turned cold. She felt both anxious and determined. It was time to confront not only those who had betrayed her but also her own fears. The sun hung low in the sky as they entered Fallow Creek, casting long shadows that stretched across the dirt streets. The townspeople were gathered near the church, their murmurs rising like a tempest in anticipation of something or someone returning. Margaret's heart raced as she spotted Elias at the forefront, his expression one of simmering anger mixed with a hint of fear. "Look who's returned," Elias shouted, his voice booming across the square as he pointed an accusatory finger at Margaret. "The witch is back. She thinks she can walk among us without consequences." Margaret felt Jonah's hand tighten around hers, a silent promise of support that steadied her resolve. Stepping forward, she raised her voice to be heard above the crowd. "I have come not to seek vengeance, but to heal what has been broken." Gasps rippled through the onlookers, confusion mingling with disbelief. It was a stark contrast to their previous fervor for punishment. A flicker of uncertainty began to take root in their hearts. "You have no idea what it means to be wronged," Jonah added, his tone firm as he stepped beside her. "But revenge will only deepen your wounds." "What do you know of suffering?" one townsman shouted back, his face twisted with rage from months of manipulation by Elia's sermons. "I know enough," Margaret replied, meeting each gaze with unwavering strength. "I know that healing comes through understanding and compassion, not through hatred." In that moment, something shifted within the crowd. Doubt began to sprout in place of blind fury. Margaret's words echoed through them like a balm on raw wounds. She continued, recounting her experiences, her struggles as a healer on battlefields and in homes alike, drawing connections between pain and redemption. Elias stepped forward defensively, but found his voice faltering against Margaret's conviction. The tide was turning. Rather than becoming an enemy in their eyes, she was offering them an opportunity for growth. As tension simmered between her and those who had once sought her demise, something unexpected occurred. An older woman from the crowd stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "You saved my child once," she said softly, breaking through the anger surrounding them. "I remember." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Others began murmuring among themselves as they recalled their own interactions with Margaret, flickers of gratitude slowly igniting amidst lingering resentment. The confrontation reached a pivotal moment. It wasn't just about punishment anymore. It became about choice and healing for both sides. In this charged atmosphere filled with tension and hope intertwined, Margaret realized that true redemption lay not in escape or vengeance, but in fostering connections rebuilt on trust rather than fear. "Together we can heal this community," she urged passionately. "Let's turn our pain into compassion rather than letting it divide us further." With Jonah by her side and newfound support beginning to emerge from unexpected places within the crowd, Margaret understood that this intense confrontation could lead them all toward a brighter path, one forged from loyalty and survival rather than conflict alone, signaling perhaps the beginning of true redemption for everyone involved. In the wake of the confrontation in Fallow Creek, Margaret found herself reflecting deeply on her tumultuous journey. The town that had once been her sanctuary had transformed into a battleground of suspicion and betrayal, yet she emerged not as a victim, but as a beacon of resilience. The echoes of laughter from children she had healed and the grateful smiles of mothers lingered in her mind, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Rather than succumbing to the desires for vengeance that had threatened to engulf her, Margaret chose to embrace her identity as a healer, one who could bridge the chasm formed by fear and misunderstanding. She understood that healing extended beyond mere physical remedies. It encompassed empathy, forgiveness, and the courage to confront one's own pain. This revelation became her guiding light as she sought to mend not only herself but the community that had wronged her. As days turned to weeks, she worked tirelessly within Fallow Creek, earning back the trust of those willing to see past their prejudices. The townsfolk began to share their fears and concerns with her, opening up discussions that had once been stifled by anger. They learned that true strength lay not in isolation or retaliation, but in unity and understanding. Margaret's relationship with Jonah also deepened during this time. He stood by her side not just as a protector but as a partner in healing, his own scars becoming part of their shared narrative. Together, they forged a new approach for Fallow Creek, one that emphasized compassion over condemnation and aimed to heal collective wounds rather than deepen divisions. Reflecting on her journey, Margaret realized that betrayal had not defeated her. Instead, it had illuminated her capacity for resilience and growth. She had transformed from a healer on the run to a catalyst for change within a fractured community. The complexities of moral choices became clearer as she navigated this new identity, a testament to human frailty and strength intertwined. As she looked out over Fallow Creek from a hilltop one evening, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, Margaret felt a profound sense of hope. She had reclaimed not only her role as a healer, but also her agency in defining what it meant to be part of this world, a commitment to compassion that would echo through the hearts of those around her for years to come. In this changed world, Margaret Lane stood resolute, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with renewed purpose and an unwavering belief in the power of healing through empathy. It was not merely about survival, it was about redemption for herself and for the community she had fought so hard to protect.